I'm really looking forward to this session. It's billed as Conversation with Vint Cerf. I'm sure everybody here knows who Vint Cerf is, so I won't repeat yet another introduction. I will just say that if you haven't had a chance to talk with him, he kind of looks like that guy in the beer commercial, the most interesting man in the world, but I'm going to say it differently. He's actually the most interested man in the world. Vint has an insatiable curiosity about almost everything. So I asked him what he wanted to talk about, and we got an opening. And then I asked all of my friends who know him, what would you ask Vint in front of an audience? And so I've got 6 or 7 things to ask him about, which he does not know, for the next roughly 20 to 25 minutes. And we'll end on time, even though we're starting a minute or two early. So first, Vint, you're doing something with Peter Gabriel, Neil Gershenfeld, and Diana Reiss. Can you say a little bit about it? So you've all heard interplanetary. We're not going there. Today we're doing interspecies.
So thanks so much for asking that question. The interspecies internet idea was spawned by an interaction that Peter Gabriel and Neil Gershenfeld, Diana Reiss, and I had way back in 2013. We got together and talked about what it would mean to open the internet up to non-human species. You know, what could they do with it? And we got to thinking that, well, maybe it could have a role to play in exploring whether non-human species could communicate with each other. There had already been some extraordinary interactions between humans and non-humans, and I have a list of them here if we care to explore some of them. But our question was, if we wanted to explore 2 non-human species, different species interacting with each other, how would we do that? Particularly given that sometimes they're not co-located. So, you know, if you wanted dolphins to talk to apes, for example, the internet could be the medium through which this exchange could take place. So we began exploring that. It's been a rather slow process, but we've reached the point over the last couple of years where we're having annual meetings now with a couple hundred people, a workshop with researchers in this area, and then a public event to report progress in this space. Our curiosity is triggered by a lot of examples of extraordinary cognitive behavior in non-human species. So for example, Peter Gabriel was known to jam musically with bonobos and orangutans and great apes and so on. And it's astonishing. If you go on YouTube and look for videos, you'll see examples. For example, you see, I think it was a great ape discovering octaves on a piano keyboard and then playing octaves because for some reason that resonated, which, you know, I think we all appreciate. Or Roger Payne, for example, who was recording whale song way back in the 60s and even published one of the most popular records ever, whale song. But he had recordings on magnetic tape, which were starting to deteriorate. And so the Interspecies Internet project, together with the Jeremy Collar Fund, underwrote the cost of digitizing all that information to preserve it. Diana Reiss has been doing this work with dolphins, and she put mirrors up with cameras behind them, so they're, you know, half mirrors, so she could observe the dolphins who were observing themselves. And she very clearly was able to demonstrate they recognized self. They would watch themselves doing things. They would perform and blow little rings and fly through them. So there's more, but let me just say that our purpose is not that there's anything magic about the internet, except it becomes a conduit. Right. Although we're beginning to think that there might be an active machine learning role for internet to play. I mean, suppose that there is an expression, an utterance, or some signal that comes, let's say, from a dolphin. That signal may not be recognizable by, say, an elephant. But what if the internet had been trained to somehow recognize the semantics of what the dolphin was doing and translate that into semantics the elephant can understand. Of course, this raises the very fundamental question, what does a dolphin have to say to an elephant? Do they have anything in common?
Right.
And of course, we don't know the answer. One more thing, just to round up on this preamble. There's a very, very interesting dog. His name is Bunny. And Bunny is a sheepadoodle. And there's a group that was started out in UC San Diego, a company called Fluent Pet. And these are hexagonal arrangements with buttons that are large enough for a dog's paw to push on them. Mm-hmm. And the owner records any sound, any utterance desired for each button. So whatever vocabulary and whatever language you use to speak to your dog, you can record on the buttons, and the dog can generate those sounds. So this sheepadoodle Bunny is composing multi-component sentences, probably not more than 3, and it's more than just go outside or go for a walk or I want to play. There are apparent indications that the dog recognizes when someone is not present and can ask, where are they? Wow. So all of this leads us to believe that there is a great deal more to learn about the notion of cognition and the evolution of brains, and that humans are not the only animals that have cognitive capability.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I'm going to go shift a little bit.
I'm sorry, could I just say that?
Yes, please.
For people who are interested in this, there is a website called Interspecies.io. And if you go there, you get an idea of what it is we're trying to do. You're more than welcome to participate. We've got Slack groups, and we've got GitHub, and we've got software all over the place. So there's plenty of opportunity to engage.
And I'm picturing a Google Translate in the cloud, handling all of the AI and machine learning to make all of this work somewhere along the line.
Well, you can just, hear the pigs saying, well, what the chicken really intended to say is.
Right. Yeah, sounds like a meeting at a university. Okay, one of the things, again, that I don't think everyone realizes how much time you have spent personally to try to help get those who are unconnected connected to the internet, both domestically and internationally. So a couple of questions on that front. Where do you see progress being made? Where do we need to put more energy, more resources, more attention? And are there ways to make this economically positive so that it isn't all goodwill? I think we used to talk about, even at PTC, how do we help the telecom companies do well by doing good? So off on any of that.
Well, first of all, you've had your finger in this pie too for a very long time, and thank you for that. Keep doing what you've been doing. Keep encouraging people. The Network Startup Resource Center at the University of Oregon. Steve Hooter has run that for years. I'm chairman of the Marconi Society, and we've decided that we're going to do something called digital inclusion, which is looking for ways of bringing people online. And of course, dealing with the problem of safety and security and privacy and all the other, battling potential harmful side effects of being online, which I'm sorry to say have emerged over the course of the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years. But it's not surprising. I mean, this is a powerful infrastructure and platform. And historically, people have found ways to abuse those things. And so why should we be any different? So several things are happening, much to my great surprise and satisfaction. One of them is an increasing amount of undersea cable is going everywhere. If you look at telegeography and you look at the last decade or two, you'll find an increasing number of high-capacity cables are being built. Google is building some of them on its own in some cases and together with others. The Pacific Islands, some of them anyway.
It has exploded in the Pacific Islands over the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I was at Vanuatu at the South Pacific IGF a couple of years ago before the COVID mess. And they had a major cable coming in funded by the World Bank. So your point about this being economically feasible, not just that somebody can afford to do it, but that it's actually supportable as a business, that there is recovery, and it's affordable by the people who need access to it. So undersea cables is one avenue for getting a lot of disconnected islands, especially backed up onto the net for the first time. Satellites, of course, have been historically around, and we talked about Norm Abramson and his exciting work on satellite connectivity for developing countries. But now we've got low Earth orbiting satellites, and of course the most spectacular of which is the Starlink program that SpaceX is undertaking. What's spectacular about it, of course, is the sheer magnitude of the effort. The numbers are mind-boggling. 42,000 satellites, at least that's the permission that SpaceX has obtained from the FCC, and orbits to go with it. At some point, it may be impossible to avoid access to the internet because the satellites are able to reach everywhere, including the North and South Pole, which you mentioned earlier as a continent which needs more connectivity, and indeed it does. There are other low Earth orbiting satellite companies that are pursuing the same thing. Again, cost and cost recovery, capital costs as well as operational costs are all very, very important. Another thing which I have focused my attention on for the past decade or so is the interconnecting the Native American population, indigenous populations in the US who've been isolated for literally hundreds of years and would benefit greatly from having access to the internet, the information that offers opportunities to find work. Which, by the way, the pandemic has taught us is possible to be done in many cases remotely. Right. I mean, we're in this session, both of us would prefer to do.
Definitely, the pandemic has been a boon to helping the public and everyone understand just how critical infrastructure this is.
So there's a project that was started a decade ago, a little more than that, called MLab for Measurement Lab. Google was the initiator, but it invited a number of participants, and now the Code for Science and Society is housing the bulk of the effort. And that work is to collect data about the performance of the internet. It's obtained from users who run a speed test voluntarily, so we're not snooping on anybody. They run the test, the data comes to us. And we build a large scale, many terabytes of data, which can then be visualized and can be used to help legislators figure out where is the need greatest for increased infrastructure. So we're at the Marconi Society working together with MLab and with Google and others, looking for ways of improving the quality of the information, creating a data trust with a lot of information that can be shared and analyzed, and new tools for both data capture and visualization. So those are a few of the things that are going in our direction, but we have a very long way to go. I've also been focusing on the Caribbean because a lot of the islands there are also inadequately connected to the internet. And once again, a variety of possibilities, cable, satellite, and locally, of course, wireless, which of course is why we're celebrating Norm Abramson's contributions, because he brought wireless to the packet switching world. So all of those things have been on my agenda, both in personal work with nonprofit organizations and with my work as the chief internet evangelist at Google.
How about on the policy side of things? Do you see anything changing? Because for so many people, it's not that they can't get it, it's that they can't afford to get what they need.
Well, certainly driving cost out is part of the story, and there are a number of ways to achieve that. As engineers, you and I both know that figuring out how to solve a problem less expensively is generally a good thing. Either reduces the prices or it increases margins or both, and that's beneficial for everybody. So there's a lot of work going into reducing both the operational cost and the CapEx cost of devices. Certainly the mobile telephone or smartphone business is helping to drive some of that as well. We're seeing less and less expense on more and more functional capability, to say nothing of investment in 5G and 6G, whatever that turns out to be. So that's one thing. Another thing, though, is to push policies that allow governments to subsidize the cost of access for people who really need some help. This is taking a page from the telephone industry, which subsidized rural telephony costs by taking some of the profits from urban telephony services and applying them to reduce the cost for the high cost rural areas. And we still need to work out a lot of those possibilities, and there are many combinations that might be adopted. You know, give you an example, Google built a fiber network in Uganda, Kampala, on a wholesale basis, so it's expecting to recover its cost, but it made the services available wholesale to retailers who could then market their services and their add-on services and compete with each other for business in the city. So that's one example. The government could decide to do that. It could decide to underwrite the cost of the basic service and then recover the costs over time. So thinking creatively about various business models seems to me another part of the solution to the access problem.
And I think in the US with the infrastructure investments in middle mile, that's likely to leverage similar to what Google did in Uganda, I think.
So here's another example of technology is trying to make a difference. The X organization, which used to be part of Google, now it's part of Alphabet, has been working on a free space laser, which the pairs cost about $50,000, trying to drive that down to about 28,000 a pair in quantity. But they can produce somewhere between 10 and 20 gigabits a second over a 1 to 10 kilometer range. Now, of course, there are always issues associated with atmospheric precipitation and other sorts of things. But the point is that it's cheaper to do a point-to-point laser length than it is the full fiber in many cases. So that's another middle mile kind of technical solution that might be attractive.
Okay, another one. So we're in a world that will soon be IPv6, right?
You know, this would be the biggest gift. Finally get this done. It's 1996, right? So we're talking, holy moly, how many?
Yeah.
24
Okay,
years.
so what's next? We've solved that one.
Well, you said we weren't going to do the interplanetary thing, but I do have to say that when we started working on that, we discovered that TCP/IP and its derivatives didn't work very well when round trip times were 40 minutes or an hour or a day or what have you. So that's one thing that's next, and it's imminent in the sense that the return to the moon is imminent. The first figure 8 circumlunar launch may be as early as this year. In a few months' time, and of course a manned mission will probably come some years later. But we're hoping that these new interplanetary protocols will be part of the solution to communications for that environment, and of course further on as we go to Mars and the outer planets. So that's one thing that's next. I think another thing that may turn out to be next, because it's becoming heavily invested in, is quantum internet, which I kind of dismissed for a while as if, you know, okay, you stick quantum on the front of everything and it's brand new and, you know, shiny object. But actually, I learned more about the challenges of building quantum computers. We're doing that work at Google, as are others, IBM, and so on. And one of the challenges is that in order to do a serious quantum computation, you may need a very large number of physical qubits in order to model a logical qubit. And the reason that this is an issue is that the qubits lose their coherence over time. And so in order to maintain the computation, you may actually want to use error correction to allow the computation to continue over time. But what that means is that you may need 1,000 qubits for one logical qubit. And so now, what if you need 1,000 logical qubits in order to do a significant computation? Then you need 1 million physical qubits. Well, getting 1 million physical qubits into a general area is not so easy. And you could say, well, can't you shrink everything down? And the answer is not so clear. So what do? Well, one possibility is if you can figure out how to build a 1,000 qubit machine, a physical qubit machine, you could imagine having multiple of them interconnected in such a way by optical fiber that you could send entangled photons that effectively entangle the quantum machines with each other. And so you build a larger quantum machine by entangling multiple quantum machines using these entangled photons to accomplish that coherence. And so that's actually rather exciting. There is a fair amount of progress being made figuring out how to deliver the entangled photons so that their state is not lost as they arrive at the destination. So that's another exciting thing, which is still in development.
You mentioned free electron lasers as a transmission, and we fooled around with them at the University of Hawaii probably first, I don't know, 20 years ago, much lower speeds to connect buildings where we didn't have fiber mile or two away. What other transmission media are you seeing that may be of interest that we aren't thinking about much more, if any?
There are two that come to mind. One of them is using sonar, or effectively sound, acoustic transmissions. There have been some experiments done involving the delay and disruption tolerant networking protocols and some work with the US Navy with underwater acoustic communications. The data rates are modest, but sometimes you don't need much if you're just picking up sensor information. So that's one kind of thing that is possible. Another one for deep space is optical, again, instead of radio. And the third thing along the radio line, which is back to our important contributions of AlohaNet, and that's to make use of the fact that radio is a broadcast medium. And the protocols that we've built around the internet have tended to force everything into point-to-point.
Right.
It's something that V.S. Chen brought up in his discussion in the session that we had about Norm Abramson. And I thought that was a really important suggestion that several suggestions that he was making about looking at alternative ways of making use of a broadcast or multicast medium instead of mechanically trying to make copies of things. So I'm actually quite excited about the possibility that we take advantage of, recognize the broadcast functionality of radio and try to harness that capability with new protocols.
Okay, we're down to our last minute, so I just have two super fast questions. What's a wine or two that you might recommend to people who are tuning into the session? For those of you who don't know, Vint is a connoisseur of fine wines.
Several American wines: Stag's Leap, Cask 23, Cabernet Sauvignon, absolutely amazing. Beaulieu Vineyard, Georges Latour Private Reserve, if you can find it. So that's on the U.S. side, and almost any of the white Burgundy Chardonnays that you can get your hands on will turn out to be wonderful. I haven't said anything about the Australian wines, which I love, the Shiraz, and the New Zealand wines, especially the Sauvignon Blanc. The Italian wines in the Priorat region, for example, all wonderful stuff.
Okay, last one. How many three-piece suits do you own, and where do you get them?
Let's see. I don't know, like 14 or 15 of them, and I kind of cycle through them. I get them mostly at a company called Nordstrom, which they will take a three-piece suit like a Hart, Schaffner, and Marx, for example, or Hickey Freeman. And if they don't normally have a vest, they will make the vest for me special. So I've been shopping there almost since the store was opened in my neighborhood here in McLean, Virginia.
And did you know they would come back when you were wearing them and you were the only person around?
No, I didn't care about that. I know we're over time, but there is a funny story associated with the three-piece suit if you're interested. I used to wear a tie and a coat, a sports coat and slacks in high school, and I carried a briefcase. I guarantee no other kid did that. I just wanted to look different, but I wasn't going to, stick rings in my nose or wear my hair down the waist. So I just dressed differently. Then when my wife learned that we were going to go from Stanford University to Washington, D.C., she said 3-piece suits. And so she went to Stanford Shopping Center at Saks Fifth Avenue and bought 3-piece suits. One of which was a seersucker outfit because she knew that the summers are horrible and muggy in this area. So I show up at ARPA in my 3-piece suits. Nobody says anything. And then I'm asked to give testimony at some point before a committee. I don't remember which one now. And I was wearing my seersucker 3-piece suit at the time. So I did my testimony and I came back and, we went on about my business. And a few weeks later, the director of ARPA, who's 2 stories up beyond me, says he wants to talk to me about my testimony. And of course now I'm afraid that I've just blown my government job. I'm about to get fired, I've done something real bad. So I show up and he's sitting there. He's got a letter from the chairman. And he says, the chairman says, thank you very much for Dr. Cerf's testimony. By the way, he's the best dressed guy from ARPA we've ever seen. And I took that as positive feedback, and I've been wearing 3-piece suits ever since.
Okay, thank you, Vint Cerf, everyone. Thank you, Vint. Have a good rest of your evening. Aloha.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the chance. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Look forward to seeing you in person, yes, indeed.
Here.
Thanks.
Bye for now.